Hello. In this video, I would like to review the Moto G84 review. I trust that this video is very useful for all of you. When you have already watched the video, you know about Moto G84 clearly, and it helps you in making a decision to choose a better smartphone for your work and lifestyles. I will introduce to you the detailed Moto G84 review that is useful for you. Please kindly enjoy watching the video as following. Motorola has always had a knack for making great budget devices. Nowadays, the company has a rather full and fleshed-out portfolio, including more premium models from the Edge series and even its foldable form factor offers in the Razr line. Still, there is something about the Moto G line that remains the bread and butter of the legendary company. Today, we have the Moto G84 in for review. It is technically the highest-end offer within the budget G family, and budget does remain the main focus here, with an MSRP of 19,999 Indian rupees, $245/€222, in India and 299 euros on European markets. The Moto G84 has a classical look all around, but one slightly spiced up by the inclusion of Pantone color options, Viva Magenta and Marshmallow Blue. Both of these variants come with a faux leather back panel and a vibrant color. The phone can also be had with a plastic back in the more conservative midnight blue color while still offering a color-matched camera island and middle frame. Besides looking great, the Moto G84 also packs some interesting specs for its budget price tag. The 6.55-inch 10-bit OLED display with a 120 Hz refresh rate and 240 Hz touch sampling rate stands out. Motorola promises 1,300 nits of maximum brightness on the particular panel. Other highlights include a stereo speaker setup complete with Dolby Atmos support, Moto Spatial Sound support, and a 3.5mm audio jack. The G84 also comes with two nano SIM slots, one of which also doubles as a microSD expansion slot. Though only consisting of two modules, the rear camera system on the phone looks impressive on paper with a 50MP, OIS-enabled main snapper and an 8MP ultra-wide, complete with autofocus in order to double as a macro camera. The Moto G84 also has a fairly large 5000 mAh battery despite its pretty light 166.8 G body. Unfortunately, Motorola had to cut corners somewhere and decided to skimp on the chipset. The Snapdragon 695 was never a particularly good chip, even back in 2021 when it was announced. It is not particularly powerful, but that's arguably not its biggest crutch, which is its ISP, which is limited to 1080p video capture. A very unfortunate reality to deal with in 2023. Still, if you don't care about any of that, the G84 has plenty of other redeeming qualities and seems quite likable, at least on the surface. Design. As already mentioned, the Moto G84 is rocking a very traditional design. Dare we say even a bit boring. Shape-wise, there is nothing particularly interesting here. The G84 uses a standard sandwich construction with the front and pack, mostly flat panels tucked inside the plastic middle frame. There are still some strategically placed chamfers that improve handling and add a little flair to the design. The real visual attraction here is the color options. These are three in total: Marshmallow Blue, Midnight Blue and Viva Magenta. From what we can gather, just the hero color, Viva Magenta, comes courtesy of Motorola's partnership with Pantone. This is what our review unit is colored in, and it looks awesome. We particularly like how the color looks slightly different on the different surfaces of the phone, yet well matched down to the phone's camera island and middle frame. In terms of materials, Marshmallow Blue and Viva Magenta have faux leather backs with a very pleasant fine texture to them. Midnight Blue comes with a more traditional plastic smooth back panel. Still, the color matching is present on all of the color variants. We quite enjoy the aesthetics of the camera island. There is nothing particularly special about it, yet it still looks memorable enough with its color-matched surface finish. The same goes for the middle frame, which pulls off a very convincing, almost brushed metal kind of look. Of course, it is plastic to the touch, but that doesn't detract from the impressive look. Build quality. The Moto G84 is a decently big phone with a 6.5-inch display, measuring 160 by 74.4 by 7.6 mm. It also has a large 5000 mAh battery on board. Yet, it is pretty light, tipping the scale at 166.8 grams with great weight distribution. A lot of that lightness comes down to the mostly plastic construction of the G84. The phone's middle frame is made of plastic. Even so, it feels very sturdy with practically no flex. There is no hollowness to the plastic back panel either. We can only assume that there is a plastic panel underneath the faux leather finish on our model as well. In terms of other materials, the front of the Moto G84 is made of some sort of glass. The Moto G84 has an IP54 ingress protection rating, which is rather basic but is still better than nothing. Technically, that means the phone is splash and dust resistant. A nice rubber gasket on the SIM tray leads us to believe that the G84 might even survive a quick dip in clear water. Though we are definitely not endorsing doing that deliberately. Controls. The Moto G84 has a standard set of controls. Its layout is perfectly standard, too. You have a power button on the phone's right side and a volume rocker right above that. These buttons are a bit on the small side, but easy enough to feel out. They offer nice tactile feedback. The left side of the frame houses the dual nano SIM tray. As already mentioned, one of the SIM slots also doubles as a microSD slot. Choosing between a second SIM and expandable storage is not ideal, but at least you have the option. The top of the phone is practically empty, sans for the secondary noise-canceling mic. The bottom of the phone is quite busy. A 3.5mm audio jack is here, which is great to see. Also, the main microphone and the Type-C port. There is also a bottom-firing speaker. The G84 has an amplified earpiece tucked away above the display that doubles as the second speaker on the stereo setup of the G84. While the G84 doesn't have excessively big display bezels, there is still a bit of space above the display to hide away the proximity and light sensors. These are positioned to the left of the earpiece. Unfortunately, in case you were wondering, there is no notification LED on the G84, which is kind of the norm nowadays. We do feel like we have to note that the punch hole for the selfie camera is a bit on the larger side, given the diameter of the actual camera being housed within it. The Moto G84 uses an under-display fingerprint reader. It is pretty snappy and very accurate. We have no complaints about it. Connectivity. The Moto G84 is a dual-SIM 5G device with support for both SA and NSA sub-6 on both SIM slots. In terms of local connectivity, the G84 supports dual-band Wi-Fi 6, AX, Bluetooth 5.1 with LE support. The phone also gets both an FM radio receiver and NFC, but both are market-dependent, so be sure to check with your local vendor. For positioning, the G84 has GPS, GLONASS and Galileo support. The Type-C port on the Moto G84 supports a USB 2.0 data connection, which means a theoretical max transfer speed of 480 megabits per second. There is USB OTG/host support, but unfortunately, you don't get anything fancy like video output. However, Moto Connect is on the G84, allowing you to connect to displays wirelessly via Miracast. A PC companion app is available that can communicate with the G84 and allow you to use apps on your PC, share files, and even use the phone as a webcam. The Moto G84 has a pretty decent set of sensors on board. These include a LSM6DSO accelerometer and gyroscope combo, an eminent 512 light and hardware proximity sensor, and a QMC6308 magnetometer and compass combo. You are missing a barometer, though. Display. The display is clearly the Moto G84's highlight. It is rocking a 6.5-inch POLED display with 120 Hz refresh rate and 10-bit color. It is punching above its price range, even simply on paper. Resolution-wise, you get the pretty standard 1080 by 2400 pixels or 20:9 Full HD+. That results in roughly around 405 ppi of pixel density, which is perfectly sharp in person. Motorola advertises 1300 nits of maximum brightness on the G84, which is quite impressive. In our standardized testing, we measured 502 nits on the slider and a maximum of 996 nits in auto mode in bright conditions. As a reminder, we test displays at 75% fill, so Motorola's advertised numbers sound perfectly plausible when measured on a smaller area. In practical terms, the G84 is plenty bright and perfectly usable outdoors, even in direct sunlight. The Moto G84 has a total of 2 color modes, the default saturated mode and the natural mode. Saturated targets the DCI-P3 color space and does that quite well. Color accuracy is also decent, though not perfect, with pretty saturated blues and an overall cold tint. You can correct most of that using the included color temperature slider. In natural mode, the Moto G84 aims for the sRGB color space and practically nails that with delta-E values of under 2 and thus low enough for the mode to be considered color accurate and even good enough for color-sensitive work. The Moto G84 also offers 10-bit color. Despite that and its solid brightness output, it has no hardware support for HDR on the display. That's a real shame and a missed opportunity in our mind, as it would go well with the existing stereo speaker setup with Dolby support. From a decoder standpoint, the G84 supports HDR10 and HLG. There is no HDR10+, nor is there Dolby Vision. At least we are happy to report that the Moto G84 has the highest possible Widevine L1 DRM certification, allowing services like Netflix to offer full HD stream to saturate the phone's display resolution. High refresh rate handling. The Moto G84 supports a total of 3 refresh rate modes, 60 Hz, 90 Hz, and 120 Hz. In terms of display operating modes and settings, you get to choose between 60 Hz, 120 Hz, and auto mode. Motorola has a track record of handling high refresh rates in a very simple and straightforward manner. The Moto G84 does not break this norm. Both 60 Hz and 120 Hz modes act like hard switches. In 120 Hz mode, you get a pretty much fixed and constant 120 Hz regardless of what is happening on screen and what app is being used, with some per-app exceptions that run at 60 Hz. Auto mode is quite dynamic and is mainly governed by what is happening on the display. If there is some motion going on, you are likely to get 120 Hz or even, on occasion, 90 Hz. If there is no motion, then 60 Hz is likely what you'll end up with to save energy. The other part of the switching logic is whether you interact with the display. Touching the display will instantly shoot up the refresh rate to 90 Hz, scrolling on top of that gets you to 120 Hz temporarily. Naturally, we tried high refresh rate gaming on the G84, and unfortunately, it turned out to be a mixed bag. In 120 Hz mode, only half of our games actually ran in 120 Hz mode, which is kind of weird. Things were worse still in auto refresh rate mode. All of our test games ended up stuck in 60 Hz mode. Thankfully, Motorola's game interface allows you to manually force a refresh rate on a per-game basis. All things considered, we appreciate the relative simplicity of Motorola's approach to refresh rate handling and the way that most menus and apps are handled in auto mode. However, the system is flawed when it comes to gaming and needs some work. Battery life. The Moto G84 has a fairly large 5000 mAh battery on board. While not a powerhouse in any way, the Snapdragon 695 has already proven itself time and time again to be a very energy-efficient chip. Overall, the Moto G84 does not disappoint in the battery department. It managed a solid 117 hours of battery endurance rating in our proprietary testing. The phone does great in both standby and calls. Video playback is also very efficient from the looks of things. Browsing at a fixed 120 Hz on Wi-Fi is more taxing on the battery, but the G84 still scored great in this test. As a reminder, the web browsing portion of our testing was conducted at the phone's top 120 Hz refresh rate mode, while the video test part was done at 60 Hz. Charging speed. The Moto G84 offers modest but still respectable 30W wired charging. There is a bundled 33W charger in the box, which Motorola calls a turbo power charger. It is rated for the following outputs: 5V at 3A, 9V at 3A, 11V at 3A and 12V at 2.5A. A quick test reveals that it actually supports the Quick Charge 3 Plus standard. Speakers. The Moto G84 is equipped with a stereo speaker setup. There is one dedicated bottom-firing speaker and an amplified earpiece that handles the other channel. This is a so-called hybrid setup, which is pretty common nowadays. This asymmetrical speaker positioning does harm the balance of the audio output. Even so, the G84 manages to produce a surprisingly balanced sound. The G84 is also pretty loud, managing a very good loudness score in our testing, even if just barely so. Regarding frequency response, the output of the G84 is quite clean. Mids, in particular, like voices, sound good and clear, which is arguably the most important bit. There is even some semblance of bass. This could at least partially be thanks to the inclusion of Dolby Atmos on the G84. You get a full equalizer to play around with and presets, including an automatic, smart one. Familiar AOSP with a Moto skin and features. The Moto G84 doesn't stray from Motorola's usual path when it comes to software. You're getting a nearly AOSP-looking version of Android 13, in this case, augmented by a handful of proprietary features. We believe that the clean appearance is a selling factor generally applicable to all Moto devices, while the added functionality helps widen the appeal for even more users. One thing that readily sets apart AOSP, or Pixel, versions of Android, and in turn, Motorola's, from essentially all manufacturers' overlays, is the quick settings and notification shade. That means big and bubbly buttons, of which you only get 4 on the first pull, up to 8 on the second, and a full-screen notification shade. Widgets are another thing some makers like to take their own path, but Motorola sticks with Android's interface, introduced with V.12 and carried over for another OS version. The widget picker offers responsive previews for differently sized widgets. The API supports dynamic coloring by tying into the Material You theming engine, allowing the widgets to adapt to the wallpaper. The Material You auto-theming feature is here, too, though it's masked behind a slightly customized Moto-specific theming interface. You can still get wallpaper-based accent colors, which will apply to Google Apps and the Settings menu. As is usually the case, Motorola has added a handful of useful extras. They are all placed in a Moto Settings app that lists them in categories. The Moto app itself has a new, fresh look this year. The first category is personalization, where the OS native auto-theming is housed on Moto phones. There is also a wide selection of Moto wallpapers in addition to Google's own, plus the option to leverage AI to create your own from the photos in your gallery. Then come the gestures. By now, you must have seen Moto's karate chop motion that turns on and off the flashlight and the twisting motion that launches the camera app. Both work even when the device is locked. The lift to unlock gesture works well with the face unlock, as it unlocks the device as soon as you pick it up and look at the screen. A swipe to split function is available, too. It triggers split-screen multitasking. You can also double-tap the back of the phone to do a custom action. Browsing through the display section, we didn't actually find Motorola's peak display option, though it still seems to be present and working fine on the G84. The screen lights up when it detects motion that's close to the phone or when you pick it up. Once you've received some kind of notification, you can tap on it, see the message, and even interact with it from the lock screen. Attentive display disables the screen timeout as long as there's a face looking at the screen. Then there's the play section. Here, you'll find the game time utility, which offers the usual functionality of tools like call and notification blocking and screen recording. Additionally, there are optional shortcuts for media playback when the screen is locked using the volume keys and a Dolby Atmos sound enhancement utility. You can also force a refresh rate on a per-app basis from the game launcher, which you might have to do given the G84's relatively poor automatic behavior while gaming. With recent versions, Google has been investing heavily in Android's privacy and security aspects. This includes things like the privacy dashboard, which offers a unified view of what permission is being used by what app and when. There are also the camera and microphone indicators in the top right corner of the screen for an immediate clue that you're being watched/listened to, but also the quick toggles to limit access to those altogether. There is also the option to determine whether an app gets your precise coordinates or an approximate location. Secure Folder is self-explanatory. It is a vault to keep your sensitive apps and files. A few interesting network protection options are on board, like blocking certain apps from accessing the network while you are connected to an unsecured Wi-Fi hotspot. Other interesting security features include the ability to lock your network and security settings for as long as your screen is locked. Also, the ability to scramble your PIN input interface for higher security. You can access all of these security and privacy settings through a separate Moto Secure app shortcut as well. Motorola's Ready For platform, now more often styled with capitalized words, though not with any significant consistency, introduced in 2021, was originally only available on high-end Moto phones but has now made its way to more budget offers like the G84 as well. It enables many use cases that put the phone in the center of a big screen experience. Connecting a TV or a monitor allows you to get a Windows desktop-like environment, play a game on your phone, display it on the external screen, or even have a video chat on a larger display. As a quick reminder, the Moto G84 lacks any video output through its Type-C port, so you can't just connect it straight to a display with a cable. You either have to use Miracast wireless technology or the PC Companion app. If you don't have a mouse and/or keyboard handy, the phone's screen can be used as a trackpad and/or keyboard. You can also use Ready For on a Windows-based PC. It runs within a window on your desktop. This is helpful when running an Android app from your computer or multitasking between devices on just one screen. Unfortunately, the desktop resolution from the G83 seems to be limited to 1280x800px, which is not ideal. Another use case of Ready For on a Windows PC is for video calls, where you can use the phone's camera to capture yourself and an external display to see the other participants. Performance. The Snapdragon 695 was announced back in 2021 and is definitely getting on in years. It was never a particularly powerful chip to begin with, but rather a decent and power-efficient mid-ranger with 5G capabilities. The Snapdragon 895 was a popular choice for mid-rangers for quite some time, but it is past its prime, and there are definitely better, newer, price-comparable chips on the market. Its noteworthy shortcoming is the limited DSP, which caps camera video capture to 1080p. The Snapdragon 695 offers a modest octa-core CPU setup, 2x2.20 GHz Cryo 660 Gold and 6x1.70 GHz Cryo 660 Silver and a somewhat meager Adreno 619 GPU. Nothing chart-topping for sure. The Moto G84 only comes in one memory configuration with 12 GB of LPDDR4X RAM and 256 GB of UFS 2.2 storage. Neither is a particularly cutting-edge interface and doesn't offer the best operating speeds. At least on a positive note, the storage is expandable via a microSD card. Let's kick things off with some CPU runs and Geekbench. The Snapdragon 695 inside the Moto G84 offers roughly the expected level of performance. However, it is on the lower end of the Snapdragon 695 spectrum. Also, it is positioned near the bottom of the performance chart as compared to its peers. As we said, the Snapdragon 695 is an aging and modest chip that offers about as much performance as the Helio G99. Anything more powerful than that, like the popular MediaTek Dimensity 1080, has it handily beat. And it is worth mentioning that you can easily get a Dimensity 8020 or 8050 equipped device in the same price range. Also, one rocking a Snapdragon 778G or 778G Plus, both of which are in a whole other performance league compared to the Snapdragon 695. Antutu is a more compound benchmark incorporating GPU runs and memory tests. It is a bit more favorable towards the Moto G84. In terms of overall performance, the G84 is pretty close to the Redmi 12, rocking a more modern Snapdragon 4 Gen 2 chipset and the Moto G72 with its Helio G99 chipset. Once again, any of the number of devices rocking a Snapdragon 778G or G Plus chip has it handily beat. The same goes for the Dimensity 1080 devices. Also, the popular Samsung Galaxy A53 with its Exynos 1380 is notably more powerful than the G84. The Moto G84 and its Snapdragon 695, or rather Adreno 619 GPU, do make up some ground compared to the Helio G99 and Snapdragon 4 Gen 2 in graphics performance. That being said, once again even the modest Dimensity 1080 offers much better graphical performance than the Snapdragon 695. Not to mention the Dimensity 8020 and 8050. 3D Mark paints a very similar overall picture. One good aspect about the Snapdragon 695 is that it really doesn't generate that much heat and is fairly easy to cool. The Moto G84 handles heat quite well. It thermal throttles, of course, like all passively cooled smartphones eventually do, but it does so gradually, with no major stutters and drops in performance. That's what we like to see. That being said, the Snapdragon 695 doesn't really have all that much performance to leave on the table at all. There is no point beating about the bush here. The Snapdragon 695 is an aging and badly performing chip, arguably holding the entire Moto G84 package back. A dual camera setup with a bit of extra versatility. The Moto G84 has a pretty familiar primary camera setup, though one not exactly borrowed from another Moto, like the G82. It is rocking a primary 50MP camera plus an 8MP ultra-wide with autofocus capabilities, thus capable of shooting macros. On the front, there's a 16MP fixed focus selfie. Digging a bit deeper into specs, we found that the main 50MP camera on the Moto G84 uses a Samsung ISOCELL S5K GN9 sensor. It is not a particularly popular part. In fact, we can't even find it in any official list of ISOCELL sensors, meaning that it could be a special order modification of some sort. We do know from Motorola that the sensor in question has a 1/1.5 inch size and 1.0 individual pixels, making it similar to the ISOCELL GN3 and GN5. It is also equipped with PDAF and OIS and sits behind an f/1.9 lens. The 8MP ultra-wide camera also uses a Samsung sensor, an ISOCELL S5K4H7AF. The last AF part denotes that it is equipped with autofocus, which, as already mentioned, is one of the party tricks of the G84. The sensor in question has a 1/4 size with 1.12 individual pixels. It sits behind an f/2.2 lens. Finally, we have the 16MP selfie cam. It is based on the OmniVision OV16A1Q sensor. It is a January 3, 6-inch sensor with 1.0 pixels and a quad Bayer filter. It sits behind an f/2.5 lens. Camera app. The camera app on the G84 is developed in-house, in contrast to the otherwise stock-looking approach to software. The basics are as usual. The camera modes are arranged in a customizable carousel formation, with the More tab at the rightmost end of the carousel holding the more seldom used shooting modes. Pro mode gives you full control over the camera's settings like white balance, ISO, focus, shutter speed, and exposure compensation, and it works on all cameras, both rear ones and the selfie camera, minus the manual focusing. A tiny live histogram is provided, but there's no focus peaking or zebras. Additional settings for each camera mode can be found by swiping down in the viewfinder. There's a tiny bar at the far end to indicate that, but if you miss it, you may be left wondering where some controls are, like the self-timer settings in photo mode. The gear icon for the general settings menu houses even more settings, though there isn't a straightforward separation of what you're going to find where. For example, the full-res mode for selfies is found in the settings menu, while full-res capture for the rear cameras is accessed from the ultra-res mode on the carousel. A lot of the app's peculiarities are long-standing Moto things, so you may be right at home if you're a recurring user, but that doesn't necessarily make them intuitive. Our verdict. The Moto G84 is what we would call a very non-offensive device. It rocks a classical look without any unnecessary austerity while still offering a splash of personality for those who want it in the signature Pantone Viva magenta color option. It is a very well-constructed and, possibly more importantly, surprisingly light and well-balanced device. While imperfect, the included IP54 ingress protection also offers peace of mind. There is plenty to like about the 6.5-inch POLED display of the Moto. It gets very bright and has excellent color accuracy and even 10-bit colors. Unfortunately, these two excellent aspects are not leveraged for HDR support, which seems like a missed opportunity. Besides that, the Moto G84 offers a surprisingly enjoyable multimedia experience thanks to the already mentioned display and a very competent stereo speaker setup. There is even a 3.5mm audio jack if that is your thing. The 5000 mAh battery, while not the fastest in terms of charging, also offers great battery endurance all around. We also generally enjoyed our experience with the cameras on the Moto G84, particularly during the day. The auto-focusing ultra-wide that doubles as a macro shooter is worth highlighting in particular. Unfortunately, the overall excellent value package of the G84 is badly soiled by Moto's choice of chipset. The Snapdragon 695 simply has no place on a modern 2023 device. It was never particularly good, even when it was new a couple of years ago, and nowadays, it is just woefully underpowered compared to what the competition is offering. However, one of the biggest blows it delivers is the 1080p video capture resolution limitation. Honestly, the Snapdragon 695 kind of ruins the G84 for us. If, however, you don't particularly care about performance, which, mind you, is still decent in practical day-to-day terms and can live with the Snapdragon 695, the rest of the G84 package is solid through and through. Pros: slick classical design with solid build quality, Gorilla Glass, IP54 ingress protection and a light body. Bright POLED display with great color accuracy and 10-bit color. Good price/performance ratio. Great battery life. Impressively clean stereo speaker system with Dolby Atmos and spatial audio, plus a 3.5mm audio jack. Clean nearly AOSP software with some powerful Moto additional features. Good daylight camera performance all around. 256GB base storage and expandable storage. Generous retail package. Cons: display has no HDR support. High refresh handling needs some work, especially for gaming use. The Snapdragon 695 is aging, not particularly performant and limits video capture to 1080p. Low-light camera performance is only average. Thank you for watching. See you next videos.